Brought to you by 1AAuto.com, your source for quality replacement parts and the best service on the internet.
Hi, I'm Mike from 1AAuto. I hope this how-to video helps you out. And next time you need parts for your vehicle, think of 1AAuto.com. Thanks.
In this video, we're going to show you how to replace the axle disconnect housing on this 2003 GMC Envoy XL. And the items that you'll need for this is a new front axle disconnect housing from 1AAuto.com, 8, 10, 15, 17, 18, and 19 millimeter socket and ratchet with a swivel, piece of pipe for leverage, 15 and 18 millimeter wrenches, flat blade screwdriver, torque wrench, hammer, jack and jack stands, and a pry bar. Start off by prying off your hubcap. And then just loosen up this 35 millimeter nut.
If you don't have the benefit of air tools, it's best to remove the hub nut the entire way at this point.
And now loosen the lug nuts in a crossing pattern. And we'll just fast forward as Mike does this. And once you've loosened them, just jack the vehicle up and then remove the lug nuts the rest of the way. Now the wheel will pull off.
Okay, now you're going to just take your brakes apart. Two 17 millimeter bolts hold the calipers on. Use an 18 millimeter wrench to hold the slide bolts. Remove those, and then use a screwdriver to pry your caliper up and off. Be sure to secure your caliper with wire ties or something out of the way, and then remove your brake pads. Two 18 millimeter bolts hold the caliper bracket. You may need to use a pipe for some extra leverage. Do this slowly and smoothly so you avoid any bloody knuckles or anything like that. Then remove the bolts the rest of the way and slide the caliper bracket off. Your rotors, hopefully will just come off with some taps with a hammer. Ours are pretty well rusted. You want to avoid hitting the rotors too hard because you could damage them. If you have to, use two M12 bolts and put them into the threaded holes in the rotor, and as you tighten the bolts up, tighten them uniformly and they'll press the rotor off. Remove that center hub nut if you have not already.
Okay, to get your axle out, you need to use a pry bar or some other long item, and you want to put it up in and put it on the back of the axle right where it connects to the transmission, or the axle I should say. Make sure you're hitting metal and it comes right out.
Using a 15 millimeter socket and ratchet and a 15 millimeter wrench, just remove this bolt. We'll fast forward as Mike does that. Now using a hammer, just hit the upper control arm off the ball joint. Now just pry open this clip and pull the harness free. And you want to secure your caliper just somewhere out of the way. So we just wire tie it right here onto the backing plate. And now you want to remove these two 10 millimeter bolts. And we'll fast forward as Mike does that. Now just lift up on the upper control arm and pull this back and make sure that the axle's loosened.
Once you have the axle free of the differential housing, you'll have to pull it out and be careful of the seal. Pull it out into the side and then kind of force it up into the right hand upper corner, and while you're doing that, push the axle out of the hub and then pull it out.
Careful of all your ABS wires, hoses and stuff. and eventually comes out.
Pry out this clip on the harness using a flat blade screwdriver. Pry out on the tab and then pry down on the harness and pull it free. And it can be a little difficult because sand will get inside there. And you'll see a series of bolts on your axle housing, but these 4 you don't remove. You only have to remove 3 of them, and it's this one right here on the end, this one all the way over here on the end, and then one up in the top corner on this side of these lines. And we'll fast forward as Mike removes those, and you will need to use a swiveling head on your socket and ratchet for a few of those. And for this top one, you'll need a pry bar to just pry down those lines. And you just want to pry that down and twist it out the rest of the way by hand. And you're all set. Using a hammer, just tap the housing. And then just maneuver it down. And you will have to lift those lines up a little bit. And the housing will pull free. On the right is the old housing, on the left is the new one from 1A Auto. You can see they're identical and they'll fit exactly the same. You just have to swap over your actuator. And to do that, just remove these 2 8mm bolts that hold the actuator in place. And the new housing comes with 2 new 8mm bolts. So after you remove the actuator, remove those 2 new 8mm bolts. Put the actuator into place, and then replace those 2 bolts and tighten them up.
And you can see here we're actually putting a new actuator on, and you can get a new actuator from 1aauto.com as well.
Take your new housing and feed it back into place, tucking it up and under those lines. And make sure it's lined up and pushed in all the way. And then we'll fast forward again as Mike replaces those bolts first by hand and then tightens them up with his socket and ratchet using a swivel for the 2 on the left. And it does help that as you're tightening that top one up to have someone else hold the pry bar. You can do it on your own, but it's a lot more difficult and it takes a lot more time. And just make sure that you torque each of those to 40 foot-pounds. Reconnect your harness and replace that clip.
Put it in. Again, careful of all your wires. And I just fed it right into the hub. Pull it. Straighten up around a little bit. Get it all the way into your hub. Okay, and then pull on it. into the axle. Be careful with the seal. Then you want to put the steering knuckle kind of back up in place as you go, so you don't overextend the CV. Just gonna put that in place and push your axle right in, make sure it's locked.
Now replace your brake line bracket and the two 10mm bolts that hold it into place. And you want to just use the upper control arm to hold the wheel knuckle in place while you're doing this. Reclip this harness. Now hammer your upper control arm back down onto the ball joint. And replace the bolt and the nut and tighten them up. You want to make sure that these holes line up in between the two holes that are on the hub, and then you just slide your rotor back into place and replace the lug nut to hold it into place. You want to check these slides on your caliper bracket, make sure they're greased up. If they're not, just apply some brake grease to them. And then fit the bracket into place. And then just start twisting in your bolts by hand and then tighten them up. Now torque these two bolts to 110 foot-pounds. Torque each of these to 110 foot-pounds. And then just replace your brake pads. And if there's no grease on the ends, just apply some brake grease. Now push your caliper back down into place and replace those two 17mm bolts. And we'll fast forward as Mike does that and tightens those up. And now torque each of those to 40 foot-pounds. Replace the hub nut. Remove the lug nut that you put on there to hold the rotor in place. And then put your wheel in place. And then replace each of the lug nuts and tighten them preliminarily. Now torque each of these to 100 foot-pounds in a crossing pattern. And then torque the hub nut to 103 foot-pounds. And then replace your hubcap. After you've done any work on the brakes, you want to just pump the brake pedal until it firms up. And then you want to do a stopping test from 5 miles per hour, then 10 miles per hour.
We hope this video helps you out. Brought to you by 1AAuto.com, your source for quality replacement parts and the best service on the internet. please feel free to call us toll free 888-844-3393. We're the company that's here for you on the internet and in person.